Your town has been host to a government conspiracy on the highest of levels. Let me tell you how they're going to cover it up.
But I'm going to strip away this mystery and expose its private part.
I thought to post this audio talk by Whitley Strieber because he's one of those fascinating public figures, successful fictional author who has since become the poster boy for alien abductions, even whilst always denying that he's dealing with aliens. He prefers the term visitors. And in a way, he's sort of like the Bertrand Russell of experiencers, shall we say, or contactees or abductees. Because Bertrand Russell's famous for having changed his philosophical point of view numerous times during his life, and Whitley Strieber has done likewise. Not to compare their philosophical acumen, but just to say that at least Whitley Strieber, if he's being honest with us, has attempted to look at this issue from every vantage point he could possibly think of, beginning with, I might add, supposing that, or identifying these visitors as demons, is one of his very first claims. And of course, sometimes it comes across as if Strieber was just minding his own business and all of a sudden these visitors started, well, visiting him, abducting him and doing all kinds of unmentionables to him. But the fact is, he had been involved in all kinds of occult practices throughout the years, and the place where these visitors first made contact with him, first appeared to him, was within his meditation room in his cabin, where he was meditating. In other words, opening up his mind wide open to whomever or whatever is out there waiting for the legal permission to enter in. But long story short, I had always wondered about MK Ultra, Monarch type, traumatic based programming or mind control or CIA involvement, which Strieber does admit to having CIA contacts, and he had wondered in the past whether they had been actually manipulating his mind somehow. And well, I mean, I always kept that in the back of my mind, that especially if you read the book The Controllers, and I'll put a link to it in the info section, you know that it's quite possible with known technology, I mean technology that's been known for decades, to cause people to have all kinds of hallucinations and implant thoughts into their mind, implant or speak directly into their skulls, whereas the person standing right next to you wouldn't be able to hear it, because it's not a sound wave. It's beamed directly into your skull, and you name it. And I finally ran across this talk by Strieber, which I found utterly fascinating because he gets into these issues. And there's also a video of a supposed alien, and which is, I mean, very obviously just a puppet. I mean, it's obvious. They even interviewed a special effects designer, and he says, yeah, it's a puppet, I could do that. Of course, you don't need an FX designer to tell you that. It's just obvious. It's an obvious fake fraud, a puppet. But they interview Whitley Strieber, and when he looks at it, he gets a bit disturbed, and he says that if it is a fake, then whoever faked it definitely knows how the visitors move, because they move just like that. Well, to me, it's quite clear that, I mean, I don't know who was doing it or what, the Air Force, the CIA, who knows who, but that they were putting him into hypnotic states, maybe using drugs, whatever the case may be, and they were having him interact with these visitors, right? These gray alien-looking things, basically just having him interact with puppets, so that his jumbled memories would come back to him as if he were having experiences with what he calls visitors. I mean, it's pretty obvious to me. especially after you hear that which he has to say. It'll probably be pretty obvious to you that this guy, I mean, I feel for him. I certainly don't know what the truth is, but it appears to me that he's been badly manipulated, programmed, mind controlled, and abused. Since I've been posting some videos about Whitley Strieber, I figure I'd tell you my Strieber story. I used to go to a coffee shop that had books available on a shelf, and as long as you were there hanging out drinking coffee, you could just pull one off the shelf and read it. So I read a couple of his books doing that, just hanging out, drinking coffee, reading, drinking coffee, reading, drinking coffee, reading. Anyhow, in one of his books, he points out that symbolism common to alien abduction phenomena is triangles and also eagles. And the very night that I read that in his book, I came home and noticed that on the bottle of the ginger beer I was drinking at the time on a regular basis, there was what? And this is on the bottle itself, on the glass. I don't know what it's called, but it's essentially a watermark on the glass itself. There was a triangle with an eagle within it. You know, it's one of those things that makes you say, alrighty then. I mean, what am I supposed to do with that? What am I supposed to... I mean, I have no experience with alien abduction whatsoever. Oh, wait a minute, I just figured it out. I've been abducted by aliens, but they just erased my memory of it. That's why I don't know that I have any experience with alien abductions whatsoever. There you go. That's a mind trip right there. That'd be fun to tell somebody who's really paranoid about aliens. Ask them, hey, you ever been abducted by aliens? And if they say no, just tell them, well, you know what that means. They abducted you and just erased your memory. Hey!
I have carried from my childhood a group of memories that I have never really understood or been able to integrate into my life. It has become clearer over time what these memories may be about. I've written about them a few times and spoken about them on occasion, but not very extensively, and the reason I haven't done it is that they're quite provocative. They implicate, quite frankly, the United States Air Force in some horrendous crimes. And I just don't know if they're real, and therefore I haven't felt that it was responsible of me to talk about them. But over this past few months, back in December, I was having a conversation with an old friend who also lived in San Antonio when he was a boy at the same time I did. And he told of something that happened in his early childhood when he was about perhaps 10 or 11, a little older than I was when it happened to me, which involved the arrival of a couple at his parents' home, who were Air Force personnel, who proceeded to tell his parents that they had their son in a Skinner box environment. That is to say, he was in a box which was completely self-contained and was never let out of it, and was living in this and being trained in this. And they were very eager for this man's now then boy's parents to get interested and involved in this. They didn't relate it in any way to their Air Force activities, but their professional activities, but rather made it sound as if it was something that they were doing out of conviction that Skinnerian psychodynamics were a good idea. The parents were appalled, and they never had any further contact with these individuals. The father had been doing work involving mind control, legal work, he wasn't a scientist. And I think that what they were trying to do was to recruit this man and his wife in the same way I believe my parents were recruited back in the late 40s or early 50s. Back in those days, I was given an IQ test at a very young age, and I can remember my mother being very excited and amazed by the outcome. And then I was taken to a man whose name I remember as being Antonio Krause, Krause, I suppose, and introduced to him. And he began to come to the house and take me and my sister to Randolph Air Force Base. And I'll tell you how I first met him. I met him before I was introduced to him. And this was through a teacher at the day camp I was at, which must have been 1948 or 1949. This little day camp out on the Austin Highway known as Jack Toller's River Ranch. I loved it there, but one day I was taken not home, but to the house of one of the teachers, being told that my mother was not at home and that I had to be taken there to stay for a while, which scared me because I didn't understand why my mother wasn't at home, and they wouldn't tell me. I was I had a nanny and lived a very wealthy life, and I was used to being in charge of servants because I had them around me, and even though I was a little child, ultimately my mammy, when I did something, unless it was dangerous, what I said went, after usually something of an argument. In any case, I found myself in a situation I had never been in before. This woman disappeared, and I was left in her living room looking for her, and I was quite frightened. And then I went into the back of the house and into the bedroom and found her tied up on her bed, and it was absolutely terrifying. And then there was this man there, and I told him to step aside, that I was leaving. And I started to walk toward the front door, and he blocked my passage. And that's the last thing I remember of that memory. The rest of it is simply black. But that was the beginning. Another memory I have is of being taken to an estate in the area, a house in the area, which I believe might have been the old Murchison estate in San Antonio on Geneseo Road in Terrell Hills, although I can't be sure. I just remember the big gates, and I remember sitting in the front seat of the day camp station wagon and being taken there and given a stuffed bear with some other children, and we were told that Stalin was good and that we were being lied to and that we had to repeat and learn this lesson that Stalin was good. And it was not a lesson I was willing to learn, even at the age of 5, I guess. And I refused to believe it. And that's where that memory ends. I think that this was some kind of brainwashing technique. I don't think that this was a communist operation, although it may have been in those days. Who knows? In any case, these are very disjointed memories. There's also another memory, two other memories. One of being in a little tiny room that I think, in retrospect, could have been even a telephone booth, an old-fashioned wooden telephone booth, probably with the windows painted black or something, with other children, all crammed together very, very tightly. And suddenly this terrible sound starts, a dreadful screaming. And I'll tell you, I heard that screaming again recently, about 3 or 4 years ago, when someone wrote me who had been researching Skull and Bones and included an audio file of a sound that she said was a sound that was played during the initiation at Skull and Bones. And it was the same sort of sound, the same absolutely unearthly, dreadful screaming. Not like, I mean, it's the kind of screaming you might have heard, I suppose, in a gas chamber at Auschwitz or something. Screaming of agony and terror beyond belief. But to be forced to listen to that at the age of 5, 6, or 7 is an absolute outrage. And I do have one piece of physical evidence that this was happening to me. In my 7th year, my immune system collapsed. And you understand what I'm telling you. My immune system broke down. I wrote about this in The Secret School. It failed. It simply failed. I began to get every kind of illness, and they found that my white blood count had dropped to 0. There's not much that does this to a little child except extraordinary stress. And I wasn't taken to my doctor to get this treated. I was taken instead to Brooke General Hospital, the military hospital in San Antonio, where I was given weekly injections of gamma globulin, and I was kept isolated for about 2 months, about 8 weeks. There is a record of this, oddly enough. I still have my old grade school report card from the 2nd grade that shows me as having been out of school in the months of November and December of that year, of 1951. That's the only thing I have, but you have to ask yourself, why would a child's immune system shut down? It happened again later when the visitors showed up in my life when I was 9. But this is an example of extraordinary stress. Now, it could be that there was something else in my whole childhood that was happening that only makes it seem like this. But these are the memories that I possess. I don't have much more than this. I don't have any detailed memories. I do remember seeing children standing in a cage and being told that I would be put in the same cage if I told my parents what was happening. I do remember that my mother and father were increasingly upset about this, and that I believe my father eventually appealed to Lyndon Johnson, who was the senator, and then at that time they were very friendly, and got me out of this program that way. I have another few memories. I have a memory of what would happen when this man would show up, which I believe took place on Thursday afternoons or Thursday evenings in our house. We would know he was going to come because Mother would start to dress us up. Little did she know what was actually happening. And she would be putting me in my little jacket and tie and combing my hair, and we would try to escape. My sister would run across the street to the neighbors, and I can remember getting up on the roof. Now, this must have been after my 7th year, because my 7th summer, because during my 7th year, an addition was built on our house that would have enabled me to climb up on the roof, but not until I was at least about 8 or 9, maybe a little older even. So it must have still been going on, and this man showed up, and I climbed up on the, got out the window, climbed onto the roof of this 1-story addition, and then climbed from there up onto the roof of the 2nd story of the house. And I can remember standing there and trying, expecting, and hoping that the visitors would take me up, that they would take me up in the air. And instead, this man came in his uniform, and he climbed up on the roof, and he came toward me. And that's my last memory, again, of that experience. Another time, I was in the front yard with a boy who lived across the street at night, and suddenly an enormous fireball came across the sky, immediately followed by a car, an old car, this man's car, in fact, racing down the street at breakneck speed. And we ran out into the street to see what had happened, and we couldn't make heads or tails of it. We didn't know. But I do know, I remember the boy being extraordinarily scared, and he went home. He may have been involved. He grew up He never left home. He lived in the same house, worked in his father's business, still living when he was married in the same room that he was living in, had been living in when he was a little boy. I guess he was in the military. He may have gone to Vietnam. He died at the age of 53 after an overdose of cortisone given to him at the VA hospital and for a back injury. He died a few years after, in fact, his name was Michael Ryan, being interviewed by Edward Conroy for the book Report on Communion, in which he corroborated some of my childhood stories and memories. And this has incidentally been a pattern. Bad things have happened to people from my childhood who I returned to meet again. And so I've been very, very careful about doing that. For example, when I was living in London, I had a marvelous friend there, a delightful guy. And we hooked up again a couple of years ago. And something went wrong. He used to send out emails of his doings and all of his activities and with pictures. And suddenly an email came from him that included a picture of myself, his own family pictures and his pictures of his recent trip, and a picture of myself, my grandson and my son, and this strange letter that looked like it was written by me, but I had never written about my alleged CIA activities when we knew each other back in London in 1968. I was a boy in 1968. I was 23 years old. I certainly wasn't involved in any kind of intelligence activities. But the point is that this absolutely terrified both of us, because he didn't put it in his letter, in his round robin to all of his friends. I didn't put it in anything. I'd never written it. I don't know. I didn't even know where it came from. It was something designed to frighten us like a shot across the bows to say, don't you dare come into contact with this man, because there might be something you'll remember that somebody does not want me to remember. Now, I would like to go on and talk about a couple of other pieces of evidence. And first, to conclude about Mike Ryan, Mike was traumatized, I think, in early childhood. He certainly showed every evidence of this. I think I was traumatized in early childhood, and I don't think we're alone. I think the whole neighborhood was bruised as if an invisible fist had come and struck quite a number of those children. What was it? Was it this? Well, I don't know. And what might have been being done? Well, I believe during the war, the Nazis discovered that they could split the personalities of children with trauma relatively easily, and that they could leave one personality on the surface, but then have access to the other personality, which they could address hypnotically and cause the other personality of the child to repeat everything the child had seen and heard, like the ultimate bug, so that they could find out, for example, by doing this to Jewish children, where their parents were keeping their wealth and so on and so forth, because the children would overhear all of this around the house. And the children could be grabbed off the street, have this done to them, and then returned with the children having no memory, conscious memory, of it even happening, because of the trauma being involved was so great. Now, I also have memories, and this is going to be relevant in just a moment, to going to Monterrey, Mexico, being taken there by my father, to a school for brilliant children. And at this school, I saw things, terrible things, that I don't wish to repeat, because when you're dealing with childhood imagination, you just don't know. And I may have seen something quite disturbing to me, but that was quite innocuous. But I remember as being very disturbing. But I do remember seeing other children in extraordinary duress and things happening that were making them think that they had been parties to murder. However, I saw through this. It was obvious that this was not the case, because the people that they had there who were dead had been dead for a long time. I was old enough to understand this, but these other children were not understanding it. And they were terrified beyond words. Terrified into becoming, in other words, completely compliant, which was the purpose, I'm sure. I went back to Monterey for the first time in my life in 2002, and I basically couldn't stand it there. I tried to go up into the hills where the house had been that we were taken to. I probably might have been able to find the house, but the roads seemed so confusing that I really couldn't manage to drive the car up there. I could go back, perhaps, and try again. I don't know. The problem is, what good would it do for me to do this? If I found a house, maybe it would be the wrong house. I have no way of telling. And this is the essential problem with all of these childhood memories. When a mind is 5, 6, 7 years old, it sees the world very, very differently from the mind of a person who is older, because it lacks a great deal of contextual information. And this has given organizations like the False Memory Syndrome Foundation the opportunity to throw up a smokescreen around all childhood memories of abuse and say it never happened, or most of it never happened. We'll talk about the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, which has some CIA-related connections, I believe, in a few minutes. But right now, what I want to do instead is to go to something else. And what I'm looking for at this point is, to a degree, corroboration. In other words, I have these childhood memories. They're rather fragmentary. They're very strange. They lead somewhere, such as somehow or another they're connected with my childhood close encounter experiences, which I certainly know that I had, because there's too much corroborating witness. There's an attorney in San Antonio who lived up the street from me when we were children, who remembers quite vividly some of these experiences. There was Mike Ryan, who lived across the street, who corroborated my memories of seeing soldiers lying on cots in the context of an alien presence when I was on a trip to Chicago as a child. He remembered vividly that I came back and could talk of nothing else for the rest of the summer. There was the lady who lived up the street who, when I used to sleep over with their child, I would want to go home in the middle of the night saying that I was afraid of being captured by spacemen. And I think this was happening. In fact, I'm quite sure it was. And so is it connected that somehow or another what happened to me before cracked the cosmic egg and opened me to the visitors? Or was it an intentional thing that was done, that somebody on some level knew it would open me to them and lead me into the place in life I've ended up in, this strange, difficult little corner of the world, which is shared by me and all of you who have had close encounter experiences, are intelligent and inquiring enough to realize that it's all real and it's worth finding out about? I don't know. Now let's go to some of the other corroboration. There was a case back in the 80s called the Finders case. This first came to light in U.S. News and World Report and earlier the Washington Post. It seems that a group of children, little children, tiny children, up to the age of 6 or 7, were found wandering around in a park in Tallahassee, Florida. They were filthy and unkempt and in poor condition. They didn't even know their own names, and people living around the park called the police. Police found 2 men who claimed to be the children's guardians, and these men were promptly arrested on child neglect charges. The children and the 2 men said that the children were being taken, and this is where my blood ran cold, to a school for gifted students in Monterrey, Mexico. In Mexico. This was in 1985 this happened. It began to be reported in 86, 87. The children and the men were linked to a group called the Finders, a commune in the District of Columbia. There was a police search of a home in a warehouse where they found bags of evidence that contained photographs, computer records, other documents. They found an altar in the warehouse, and they found jars of urine and feces. They found pictures of adults and children together participating in the disembowelment and dismemberment of goats, as if in some satanic ritual. They found the children, pictures of the children, suggestive pictures of the children. And in fact, the head and skin of a goat involved in these things were discovered by Virginia State Police during a search of a farm belonging to the Finders. So there's little question that there was something dreadful going on here. There was evidence that the Finders had sent a telex to Hong Kong attempting the purchase of a child. There were books or papers showing instructions about how to get children from parents, how to buy children. In other words, these children had been not kidnapped, but voluntarily given away or given up by their parents. The customs agents, U.S. Customs, demanded a full-scale inquiry into this business of smuggling of children. But something happened then. The Central Intelligence Agency intervened and invoked the National Security Act and quashed the investigation. There is some evidence that the CIA admitted to owning the Finders as a front for domestic computer training operations, but that it had gone sour. Well, if it had gone sour, why not let the investigation proceed? All reports concerning the Finders case were and are classified secret. Secret. Representative Tom Lewis from Florida has asked some questions which remain unanswered. Could our government have something to do with this Finders organization and had turned their backs on these children? That's what all the evidence points to, and there's a lot of evidence. I can tell you this, he said. We've got a lot of people scrambling, and that wouldn't be happening if there was nothing here. Now, that was in 1993. Since then, this has disappeared completely beneath the radar. It's gone. The Finders are presumably fine. Nothing ever happened to anybody. Who knows what becomes of these children? How many children are involved and what is being done to them and with them all over this world? We can't control what other countries and people may do outside of the United States, but the United States of America must, for the sake of its own honor and its moral value as an institution of government, own up to these abuses, make them public, and apologize for them in the same way that the United States apologized to the victims of the plutonium experiments. Now I'd like to go on to another area. During this same period, an organization called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was founded in 1992 by two psychologists or psychiatrists, Pamela and Peter Freyd, with the support and encouragement of therapists Helida Wakefield and Ralph Unterwager. A group of professionals joined with the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and thousands of parents support it who have been accused by their children of child abuse, as indeed the founders, the Freuds, were accused by their daughter, Jennifer Freyd, of child abuse. They were accused of abusing her. Pamela Freyd has always denied this. Her husband, Peter Freyd, has admitted that he was as an alcoholic and that he may have done inappropriate things with their daughter. Pamela Freyd is herself a PhD psychologist, and she's written a book called Betrayal Trauma, The Logic of Forgetting Childhood Abuse, which basically outlines a theory of why abuse like this would be buried in amnesia because of trauma, that the traumatic amnesia actually does exist. Now, according to the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, the controversy is not whether or not children are abused. Child abuse is a serious social problem that requires our attention. Neither is the controversy about whether or not people may remember past abuse. There are many reasons why people may remember or may not remember something. Childhood amnesia, physical trauma, drugs, or the natural decay of stored information. The controversy is about the accuracy of claims of recovered, repressed memories of abuse. This is what the False Memory Syndrome Foundation says it is about. But what it would appear more to be about is protecting people who have been accused of abuse or are themselves abusers. I mentioned Ralph Unterweger. He was one of the original therapists involved in this organization. In an interview in the magazine Pedoca, the Journal of Pedophilia, Unterweger was asked the question, according to Jennifer Freyd in her book Betrayal Trauma, is choosing pedophilia for you a responsible choice for the individual? His response was this: certainly it is responsible. What I have been struck by, as I have come to know more and more and understand people who choose pedophilia, is they let themselves be too much defined by others. That is usually an essentially negative definition. Pedophiles spend a lot of time and energy defending their choice. I don't think that a pedophile needs to do that. Pedophiles can boldly and courageously affirm what they choose. They can say that what they want is to find the best way to love. I am also a theologian, and as a theologian, I believe it is God's will that there be closeness and intimacy, unity of the flesh between people. A pedophile can say, this closeness is possible for me within the choices as I have made. Alida Wakefield said, it would be nice if someone could get some kind of big research grant to do a longitudinal study of, let's say, 100 12-year-old boys in relationships with loving pedophiles. Whoever was doing the study would have to follow them up at 5-year intervals for 20 years. In other words, this shows a degree of approval of pedophilia from founders of this organization, and an accusation that is out there, although denied, that the two founding members of it were themselves involved in child abuse. An accusation made by a distinguished academic, their own daughter. Also on the board of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation were a number of very highly placed individuals, as well as for a time, James Randi, the amazing Randi, was on that board. And you will recall, or maybe not, some years ago, some audio tapes surfaced of James Randi describing his genitals in detail to what sounded to be a teenage boy. He was confronted with this material and said that he was actually working on an undercover police investigation and could say nothing more about it. But it would seem to me that it needs to be explained very, very carefully, and that police organization needs to be identified, and that I don't believe has ever happened. So you have an organization in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation that is, to say the least, colored with a brush of uncertainty. What are they really about? What are they trying to do? Is there legitimacy to it? And what about the government connections of some of the people involved? We need to know. We need to know whether or not this is a legitimate organization. But more than that, we don't need an organization that is out there claiming that memories of abuse cannot be hidden, or if hidden, rather, cannot be excavated, because it simply is not true. Memories of abuse can be excavated, and they can be recovered. And not only that, careful investigation, which is what we need the most, can be done into organizations like the Finders, into the numerous people who have made claims like I've made, and some of them are much more extensive and fulsome than mine, and to see if there is any sign that the federal government in any form has committed this kind of abuse against children for whatever reasons of creating split personalities or whatever they may have been doing. Who knows what their ideas may have been? Whatever their ideas were and are, they're absolutely unacceptable, and it's not an acceptable activity for anyone in or out of any government to invade the psyche of a child in this way. It's absolutely unacceptable, whether it has a larger good, bad, or indifferent result. It is not acceptable. It's something we cannot do. We need an investigator on the level of Eileen Welsome, who won the Pulitzer Prize for her extraordinary book, The Plutonium Experiments, which led to a presidential apology to the victims of those experiments. Children have almost certainly been victimized as well. We need that to be known publicly. We need the damage to be repaired as far as possible, to be contained, and the abuse to be admitted. This is a first step in a level of moral cleansing that is going to go, I think, a whole lot deeper than ever, even than that. Thank you very much for listening to my story.